Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, asking your nephew to define the term bro country for you, or else a scrappy upstart, ghostwriting your uncle's new album to give it a more bro country flavor, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of October 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Remy who drove a Kia Sportage Eddie Bauer edition, and who was always trying to sell you thumb drives that he claimed had MP3 versions of every Metallica album on them. And old Remy would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you can become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taking the time and the capital to support the show in that way. If you're not in a place to support the show in that way, I totally understand. You could still help out our show in a couple of ways for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Our guest this week is an old friend of mine and a touring comrade whose music I've loved for over a decade. Mark Charles cut his teeth in the early 2000s with his band from Kentucky, the Apparitions, before moving to Washington, D.C., and briefly playing in the cult favorite band, These United States. Mark is perhaps best known for his next project, Vandaveer, that toured the country heavily starting in 2007 and logging over 1,200 shows. He's shared the stage with VanDevere, Alejandro Escovedo, Bill Callahan, Fleet Foxes, and many others. Splash Magazine described VanDevere as angelic harmonies combined with hearty rustic guitar. And NPR said that the group conjure colorful, familiar worlds that hit right at the heart. Mark is now recording under his own name, and we jumped on the phone a few weeks ago, and I got to hear about his musical journey so far. Mark Charles, my good friend, thanks so much for being on The Working Songwriter. You know, I was thinking about it this morning, and our musical paths have crossed so much over the last 10 years. But most importantly, a place where they crossed but never intersected is I live in D.C. now. You lived in D.C. for such a long time. You left as soon as I came to town, basically. But I want to know, I'm really interested in those early years of yours, playing music in D.C. with the bands that were around, playing in different bands, starting your own projects. As a young adult, what did music look like when you were first getting things kicked off?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me, Joe. I definitely, our timing did not work out in DC. Made a huge mistake leaving when I did. No, so we moved to DC in 2004, and I had a band back in Kentucky called the Apparitions, and honestly, just sort of out of desperation and circumstance, I just started going out, doing open mics, and playing sort of solo songs, as it were. And yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but it really was a special little window. Those first 5-6 years in DC, just really fertile ground, and I met so many wonderful songwriters, and we sort of stumbled into this collective that we cheekily called the Federal Reserve. And yeah, it's those memories are aging well. It was a special time. I feel like I really found my footing as a songwriter. I feel like I had friends that were really pushing me, and hopefully I was pushing them. And yeah, it was a special place, man. I was actually sort of daydreaming about the Black Cat backstage yesterday on a walk. I was just missing that place pretty fiercely yesterday.
It's a very special time in young artists' life because usually everyone's in a place where they can almost like prioritize what in later life would be much more casual friendships with other artists. But at that time, in your early to mid 20s, these can be the most important things going on in your life. Like you can think about it the first thing in the morning when you wake up and the last thing when you go down to bed. And, usually that's not the case going on later in life.
No, that is definitely not the case later in life. Yeah, it was it's a to be able to be consumed. I mean, I wouldn't say it's selfish, but to allow yourself to be consumed by your craft and your art. It's something you do get in your 20s, and I mean, I suppose some people get it in their 30s and later. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to be to allow myself, or for the situation to allow me to be consumed by that. I picked up a guitar when I was 13 or 14. I don't think I wrote a listenable song till I was 27, and that coincided around the time when I was moving to DC. So, yeah, it was a special time, and it certainly was a special place.
Were you
I
learning
cherish it.
things from the other writers that were there, or were you just kind of were you just kind of inspired that other people were writing, or were there writers working on a level that was above where you were, and what did you have to learn to kind of keep up with them?
Yeah, no, I felt like it was a master class. Some of my friends there that I made, uh, I, I I feel like I learned a great deal from. There was just metaphor and imagery that was going on in these songs, and I also feel like probably this stems from probably from a place of insecurity. But I felt like when I left Lexington, Kentucky, I was leaving a cliquey music scene
Mm.
behind. And when I got to DC, I didn't sense any of that. I felt I attributed it to the size of the city at the time, but it probably was rooted more in just sort of, you know, self-awareness or, imposter syndrome that I was suffering from. But it felt communal, and I felt like I could really, um, borrow and learn from friends of mine, just incredible songwriters, some who got some attention, some who did not. As you know, we all know it's not really a meritocracy. But yeah, it was those Federal Reserve Collective days. I mean, they are my formative years as a songwriter, to be sure.
Sometimes I find the smaller cities to have more of like a cliquey artistic and music scene than the bigger ones. You would think it'd be the opposite. Like you move to New York City and you can't get in, everyone's cliquey, this, that, and the other. But I have found over time it is like the smaller scenes
Yeah, I
that
mean
where
that
people
that
have.
was my experience. I mean, whether or not all of it to me seems anecdotal because it's just my own experience, but it felt refreshingly communal and friendly and supportive in DC. Laura Byrne, who went on to do the Minor Birds, and Jesse Elliott with These United States, and I mean John Bustine, who was honestly my favorite songwriter from that whole bunch, and a guy named Chris Walker who had an incredible project called Kitty Hawk. I just could go on and on.
Yeah.
Just so many incredible writers, and yeah, I was very fortunate to sort of accidentally rub shoulders with those folks.
Yeah, it's funny. I think about those smaller scenes, and in the smaller scenes, there's always got some guy named Todd who takes running the open mic very seriously, like the list. Like if you show up like a little bit late, like Todd, it's just like you're a joke, man. You're not on tonight.
Oh yeah,
Um,
the legal pad sign up. You had to be there at 7:55 p.m. on the dot, man.
and worst form that you could possibly do is showing up early to sign up so you get an early slot, and then not staying around to listen to everyone else's set.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Who's sticking around? No, I kid. I actually did stick around. There was an open mic thing at Iota Club and Cafe, rest in peace, in Arlington, and I met. I think that's actually where I met three or four. That's where I met Rose, my
Yeah.
partner in Vandaveer. So it was a special place, but yeah, there were other open mics that shall not be named that did not uh, meet the quality of Iota.
I didn't know Iota was closed. That's a bummer.
Yeah, gentrification and the the creep of development, comes for all of us, I guess.
Yeah, man, and whatever the opposite of entropy is coming for all of us. So I know for a while. So you moved to town with the apparitions, and now you're doing this open mic thing. When you first kind of came on my radar, you were playing in These United States, Jesse Elliott's band. How did you fall in with them, and why did you end up playing in a band when your main thing was your songwriter doing your own thing?
Well, I think I was looking for friends. This was before kids. My wife was, you know, burning the midnight oil in graduate school, which is why we moved to DC in the first place. And I was just looking for things to do. And this was the time of hunting for gigs on Craigslist. I remember going and trying out I used trying out, uh, loosely tried out for a band that was looking for a bass player. I think I had this idea that I should really play bass. It's always been my favorite instrument. I think for my caveman brain, four strings is easier than six, and so I wanted to play bass, and was just looking for an excuse to do that. And so, at that Iota Club and Cafe open mic, Jesse showed up one night, the mayor of America, and introduced himself, and and I mean, we were playing a show at DC9 6 weeks later, and we brought Robbie, the drummer from Vandaveer and These United States, and a thousand other incredible projects. Robbie came up, and we were a trio in a weekend.
Oh
And at
man.
the same time, I was cooking songs that would become Vandaveer. I didn't know that's what it was going to be at the time, but I had this simmering singer songwriter thing waiting in the wings.
Bass really doesn't get its due for what an incredible songwriting instrument it can be because it is the marriage of rhythm and melody there, which its job is to marry those two things
Hundred
if you
percent.
if you do it well. And how did that affect your songwriting, getting to play that so often?
I'd like to think it helped. I mean, I'm a huge Paul McCartney fan, and where he comes from as a bassist, what he introduces to those Beatles records and his solo output. It I think it's liberating to play the bass guitar. It's harder for, it's hard to write on the bass as a songwriter. But I think in the studio, my favorite thing to do is I can't wait to get to the bass guitar. I love working on songs in the studio, and once the song itself, the skeletal form is written, I'm champing at the bit to get to that bass, because I feel like I find the identity of the song once the bass line exists, and once it's a part of the song. I feel like, oh, now this thing has a three-dimensional shape and color.
Once you give it that shape and color, do you find yourself having to go back in the recording process fairly often to recut other parts because the song's revealed itself more?
Joe, are you suggesting that I tinker? I I tinker and edit, probably to a neurotic, unhealthy degree. So yes, I mean, even after the song, I mean, I just got my records back last week, and I'm still revisiting some of the lyrics, thinking I should probably sing that third verse differently. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
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 yeah, I
yeah.
never stop tinkering, but so certainly, I mean, every element that gets recorded has the potential to force you to revisit, or not force you, but allow you to revisit something else you've laid down. So absolutely.
We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves chronologically here, but I do want to dig down on this because I think it's a pretty interesting point. To what degree at this point? I mean, you're talking about tinkering, but specifically, you're talking about tinkering in songwriting in the actual and during the actual recording process, which would kind of imply that like the writing process is happening in conjunction with the recording. Has that always been the case for you? And can you kind of describe a little bit more about how that process works, the writing and recording and tinkering at the same time?
Yeah. So I have my own studio in my garage now, and that affords me more flexibility to sort of smear the two stages together, I suppose, or there's probably more than two. Um, I tend to write inside my house at my piano. We've got a family piano in our living room, and I've got my old Gibson that hangs just beside the piano, and that's where I that's where the songs are born, more or less. I I really start it's weird that I built this little space, and it's my own little sort of respite from all the crazy, but I don't find myself writing out here. I find myself doing the the crafting and the actual recording and the material out here. But the songwriting, I feel like it happens in stages. There's usually a uh, just it's usually a phrase. I feel like my songs tend to start with a phrase. I'll sit down at the piano with the guitar. It's a little bit like bottling lightning. I don't ever sit down and intend to write a song. They just sort of happen, and I sort of race over to the piano and I tinker with it. And these days, with a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old, I mean, those windows are like 10 and 12 minutes, and I have to be incredibly efficient with that time. And sometimes I'm 2 minutes late picking up
Yeah,
someone from school.
yeah.
But I tend to work in sort of furious 10 and 12-minute bursts until I feel like I've got a song to that, like, that first stage. And then it goes in the proverbial suitcase, and I'll stockpile a dozen or 15 or 20 or more before I actually bring them out here and start the actual demo process, I might sit down and demo 6 or 8 at a time once I feel like I've gotten them to that first like staging ground. It's like summiting a mountain, it's like getting to base camp with songs or something.
Well, and let's face it, that 10 to 12 minute window that you need to flesh something out, like, I know that you are constrained by kids. I feel the same way sometimes too. But then when I really think about it, I'm like, you know what? I think this part of the process always took 10 or 12 minutes. And the difference is instead of like doing something edifying, like watching kids, I would just start like drinking at 1 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like,
there's a lot of dicking around before kids.
right. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I think pretty much I still have time to do it. Do you find yourself, you're talking about, this writing the kernel of the song and then going to demo and tinker with things. You know that with this show, with this podcast, I'm obsessed with ironclad excuses to put off actually writing.
Oh, yes.
Do you ever find yourself using like that demo process or that tinkering process as an ironclad excuse to not actually dig into like the parts of the writing of the song that you just don't feel like doing in that moment?
The birth of the song is far more exciting. So if there's ever an excuse to just tinker at the piano with the iPhone voice memo and not get on with the actual work of crafting and finishing the song,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sitting on at least 3 unfinished albums right now, and that's probably just pushing,
Yeah.
just put you know uh, kicking the can down the road. I also, the 2020 and the pandemic turned everything upside down in terms of, what time means and how we process it. I thought I was going to release my record. I finished a record in 2019 and thought it was coming out in 2020, and then 2020 had different ideas, and then that turned into 2021 having different ideas, and then finally now, I mean, it's a long time to sit on a record, and I feared if I moved to that next stage where I come out here and start that next phase of the process with these songs that have sort of been waiting in the wing, I was afraid I would lose interest in this record as Justin, my dear friend and collaborator, Justin Craig, we spent a lot of time working on this thing, and I felt like I owed it to that record not to start this, to not move on to that stage 2 and stage 3 with this next batch of songs.
It's interesting. You and I are in complete opposite spaces. I find actually working on something, arranging it, fleshing it out in the recording process, that to me is the kind of effortless and easy and nice part. I have like the channeling is what takes a lot of mental energy, spiritual energy, psychic energy from me. I find myself, sitting down to write and like after about 15 minutes of trying to put something into, an iPhone notepad, I have to like lay down on the couch for 10 minutes afterwards because my brain is like buffering.
Well, you're also cranking out, it's no secret, but the quality is quite high, Joe. So it's taxing for a reason. I used to fret over if there would be gaps or long spells between the most recent thing I wrote and then the next thing that was to be written. If there was too long a gap, I would start to panic. I don't know what writer's block is because it's not. I feel like I would call it writer's block if I sat down and was physically trying to force the song to materialize and could not do that. But I've never been able to write that way. It's really just I'm on a walk or I'm in the middle of cooking or doing something with the kids and just a phrase catches me or it comes to mind and I'll scribble it down or I'll run over and tinker with it. That's the way more often than not songs have been born in my experience, and I'm okay with the gaps now. I used to worry about them. I used to feel like, oh, is the next one coming? I don't worry about that anymore. I sort of feel like songwriting is a compulsion and it's sort of a form of therapy for me. So I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, the problems aren't going away. So I don't think the therapy's going to go away either.
It's funny to hear you mention like the idea of writer's block. Yeah, I've never even considered writer's block with writing songs. Now, if you want to call writer's block the inability to write a good song, I can have writer's block. But
Oh,
like
sure.
like the inability, you kind of when you hear that phrase, you think of like the inability to write anything at all, and it's like, well, at any point, I could sit down and write a really bad song. You know what I mean? Like that is not a problem to make that come into the world. I think of you remember that SNL sketch where the guy sells his soul to like play guitar for like the perfect song, and Will Ferrell shows up as the devil, and he's just like fast cars, slow cars, like he's just playing like horrible songs. Like I can crap out a song like that any day of the week.
Right.
So yeah, I've just never understood like this concept of writer's block. Like nothing can come out. Something will always definitely come out. It just might not
Yeah.
be
I
good.
feel like that's probably more of a thing for the songwriter under contract. I'm just envisioning the songwriter under
Yeah.
contract down in Nashville who's contractually obligated to crank out 40 songs a year or something. To me, that I could see myself suffering from writer's block in a situation like that, just staring at the blank legal pad and just feeling like, man, shit, nothing is coming today.
Yeah.
It's just not how I have gone about writing. From the second I picked up a guitar, I started writing songs. I had no idea what I was doing. My dad gave me his old Gibson. He taught me like 5 chords. He showed me F, and that was too many fingers. So I thought I'll get to F later. And it was like
Yeah.
I had my 5 chords, and I immediately tried to start writing songs, and they were terrible. But it and they were terrible for a long time. But that they've just sort of it's been that sort of compulsion has been there from the start.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the Internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. One of the bonds that I share with Mark is our experience as fathers trying to make a living in the entertainment business. I've relied on his example and his advice many times. And one of my favorite poems about being a parent is by a poet named Kevin Carey. It's entitled Reading to My Kids. When they were little, I read to them at night until my tongue got tired. They would poke me when I started to nod off after 20 pages of Harry Potter or Lemony Snicket. I read to them to get them to love reading, but I was never sure if it was working or if it was just what I was supposed to do. But one day, my daughter, 15 then, was finishing Of Mice and Men in the car on our way to basketball. She was at the end when I heard her say, no, in a familiar, frightened voice, and I knew right away where she was. Let's do it now, Lenny begged. Let's get that place now. Sure, right now. We gotta. And she started crying. And then I started crying. And I think I saw Steinbeck in the back seat nodding his head, and it felt right to me, like I'd done something right. And I thought to myself, keep going. Read it to me. Please. Please. I can take it. So go back in time with me then for a second. We got into process a little bit there, but I want to go back in time. You're in DC, you're playing in these United States. Then there becomes the genesis of the project where I really got to know you personally, because you ended up touring that project with me, which is Vandaveer, this duo that you had with Rose. What was the genesis of that project, and how did it end up being just a duo? It was kind of like a very unusual duo where you were playing guitar and singing, and then you were with a vocal accompanist only. What was the genesis of that project, and what do you think was the kind of like creative spirit behind that project?
So when I was going to those open mics at IOTA, I realized, an open mic room is not a captive audience. It's not necessarily an easy audience. I mean, like you said, it's a room full of people waiting to get up to sing their songs.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So, but I found myself, I was sort of flabbergasted the first time it happened, but the room quieted down, and I only had to play for 8 minutes, so I didn't have to hold them for very long. But I found the first time it happened, I thought that's a fluke, and then I went back the next week, and it happened again, and truthfully, after 6 months or so of that, I thought, man, maybe I should be just writing songs on this acoustic guitar and just standing up here and doing this thing, rather than flying back to Kentucky every 6 weeks and trying to do the Weekend Warrior touring with the Apparitions. And in that period, I met Jesse, I met several other people who went on to form that collective with us. And Rose was one of those early artists that we were sort of, coming into contact with, and she introduced herself to us at I think it was a Hurricane Katrina benefit show that IOTA put on, and they just invited some people who had been showing up at those open mics to come out and gave us an opportunity to play in front of, a completely different audience. And we met Rose that night, and she's a force. She's a phenom. She introduced herself after the show, and she said, I'm gonna come up and sing with you next time. And and I said, oh, okay. And really, that was it. She told me she was gonna sing with me one night, and she came up, and it was absolutely electric. She's got just a singular voice that very few people. I just have never heard many people sing.
And
like
a
that.
singular ear for harmony as well, like to write and pick out those harmony lines.
An incredible ear. It was harmony was something I had to learn. Did not come easily to me. And I remember the first song we sang was "Oh Sister," by Bob Dylan, and I mean, it took two verses, and I thought, oh, we should do this. This should happen. And so I'd already made the first VanDevere record as a solo record. But by the time I had released that and we were touring it, she was on board, and yeah, sort of haphazardly became a duo.
Yeah. And you guys took that around the country for a long time. I mean, how long were you guys touring as that duo? 6 years, 7 years?
Oh no, it was almost a dozen. It was like
Oh, wow.
11.
Okay.
Yeah, we put out 5 LPs and a couple EPs, and actually had more success in Europe than the States. For whatever reason, we got over to mainland Europe and had an audience. It was a strange thing. It's like, people are buying tickets over here. We should probably come back.
Yeah.
So we would just hop the pond, and we felt like, we don't know what wave we caught over there, but it was substantial enough that we we honestly spent more time over there than the States touring, I feel like.
Well, maybe it caught on. It probably caught on over there because it's more expensive to get over there. So that the universe was just ensuring that you couldn't make a profit.
or or fewer people were making the leap across the pond, so there was less competition.
No, well, no. There's plenty of competition over there, man. There's a lot of
I don't like to
people.
think of it as competition. That's I shouldn't frame it that way, but
I'll think of it that way. It's all competition. The
it's a
football
war of
game on that
attrition.
night, everything is competition for the war of people's attention these days. And I think
Well,
it's a
that's true.
lot different than when we first started, man. I mean, it's
Oh,
just
that yes, for sure. I mean, we had top eights when we started on MySpace. I mean, that we are so far removed from top
yes.
eights. Remember when they went top 32? They really jumped the shark with top 32. That's when MySpace went downhill.
I think I'd gotten out by then. You stayed a little late with MySpace, it sounds like.
Probably. I'm a slow learner, Joe.
So, explain to me then, and maybe this is a delicate subject. I don't know if it is or not. Explain to me then, like how Vandaveer comes to an end after all those years of doing it together. I'd imagine it was hard to make a decision in your mind and in your heart to say, the time has come for me to do something else. Even though we've seen success, even though we've built an audience, the time has come for me creatively and personally to move on. How did you come to that decision, and what went into it?
Well, it was I came to that decision uh, over it was a labored decision, and it was painful, but it also was it sort of the decision made itself for us. I mean, it's very much an indefinite hiatus. I don't I have I can't see into the future. No clairvoyant powers, but we may or may not do something again. But we had burned it for so long, and our we put out a record in early 2016, and we really felt like it was the Wild Mercury. We really felt like we had sort of hit our personal high watermark with that record, and that coincided with you know my kids getting a little older and us moving back to Kentucky and Louisville, and just I wouldn't wasn't a rearranging of priorities, but it was just an awareness that time obviously time is finite, and everything is the calculation. There's a cost for everything, and it was harder and harder for me to justify being gone 100 nights a year, and to know what I was giving up and what I was missing out on. And my kids drive me crazy, but I absolutely love being a dad. And it was just it became obvious that was just that was a transaction I wasn't willing to make. I didn't want to miss out, and the money I wasn't making pay for the therapy money, so
Yeah, yeah.
I felt like I should probably find um, I should probably find a way to land this plane softly, not completely crash the thing. So if we want to take off again at a later point, we can, and focus on some of my other duties as an adult.
Yeah, man, I feel you. It's a really tough thing with kids, especially when you're you're not making the pay for therapy money, right? Like if you're going around, playing sold out theaters everywhere or arenas or something like that, there's a little bit more of a justification to say like, well, okay, the family will come out on the road for part of
Right.
this, or after we're done with this album cycle, we can take 18 straight months off, or so,
Right.
or you have the calculation of I have a 40-person crew that relies on me. I've started a business. This is how it has to go. And I'd imagine to some degree it's also very easy if a project never gets off the ground at all and you're not even being offered gigs to go out and play. I mean, there's no decision to make at that point.
Right.
I've been in a very similar position as you where it's like, well, I got a thing that can happen here. I have as much work on the road as I would like to have or not have. So how do you make that calculation? I've pretty much landed in the same place, which is, I read an article recently. It was a hospice nurse talking about, particularly men on their deathbeds. The one thing that they really regret is they'll say, I missed my kid's childhood. Really regret that. You know what I mean? And, reading something like that, I'm just like, okay, well, I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. I'm going to try to not make
Yeah.
that one.
That's heartbreaking. Yeah.
It is.
That I catches my breath just hearing that
Yeah.
secondhand. I mean, that just seems soul crushing.
It
And
sends chills down your spine. Yeah.
yeah, it really does. I mean, you, everyone tells you how fast it goes when you're raising your kids, but it and again, the pandemic has warped our perception of time. I just it's something I'm struggling with, Joe. I'm so excited to put out this new record of mine, and I'm also part of me is, I mean, honestly terrified that I'll be in a position where I have to make that choice again, where there's an opportunity to go out and support it.
Hmm.
Um, and what is that transaction? What does that look like? I don't want to miss the youth percussion ensemble performances or the soccer games or walking my kids to school or making their lunches or, being told how terrible a father I am. I don't want to miss any
That's
of
just
that
your
stuff.
wife. That's not them. Don't worry.
Yeah. Yeah, there are eye rolls that can't be missed, Joe.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I mean, I think we're answering the question there, which is, it's not a choice that is going to be made.
You told me one time you had a 2 weekend rule, right? Where you won't be gone 2 consecutive weekends. Is that?
Yeah, and actually at this point, I mean, I won't even do. I have my wife's a teacher, so I'll go out over her spring break for about 9 days, right?
Sure, sure.
But that's it. I'm pretty much doing long weekends now, and I've just kind of resigned myself to it's like, all right, well, does that work for the promoters? Does that work for your agent who's booking you? Does that work for everybody involved? The label putting out your record. And what I've kind of decided is like, well, it'll either work for them or not work for them. But if it
Right,
doesn't work for them, I'll just go find a different way to make money. Like I really,
right.
it's not the hardest thing in the world to make money. In fact, it's much easier to make money in any other place besides the freaking music business, right? So,
Right.
like, it's just simply not worth the trade. And there's cool career stuff here and there, and sometimes you'll do what we all do, which is compare yourself to other people. Oh man, this person has this cool thing going on. Oh, that person has that cool thing going on. But then
Yeah.
I go back
That's a
to it's
futile
like
exercise.
it is, and well,
Yeah.
but whenever you make those comparisons in that futile exercise, you never take into account like the family aspect of it. It's just like, man, I'm so
Right.
rich in this family area, and it would be a really bummer. It'd be a bummer not to have that. So
Yeah, when we are so incomprehensibly lucky to be
yeah,
alive and to have our health,
yeah,
and if you're fortunate enough to have healthy children and a healthy relationship, I mean, you just have already won so much.
yes,
It's to to look, to look at the guy or person, who's, two rungs up the ladder and to think, you know, to
yeah.
have any envy, it just seems just so pointless.
It's the height of idiocy to focus on the fact that one single person is making $15,000 more dollars a year than you, and not focus on the fact that you live in an age that has antibiotics and bridges. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah, I mean, people had their tongues cut off for swearing because people were convinced that swearing brought on the plague. And we are
right?
not living in those times. So
We're good.
we're
I,
good. We're good, Joe.
I eat tacos for lunch and Chinese food for dinner, and my kids swim in fruit roll-ups. Life is, it's amazing. Talk
Walk
to
down the
me.
cereal aisle and just ask yourself.
So talk to me about this new record that I know you labored over for a very long time. You sent me the demos very early on when you were working on it. You worked on it with a longtime collaborator, Justin Craig, this amazing guitar player and producer who's played on a lot of my records as well. Talk to me about the process of this most recent one and how it differed from earlier records that you've put out. What have you gotten better at as you've been working over all these years?
Wow. Letting go. I've gotten better at letting go. Uh, Justin and I mean, I cannot say enough. He really is a ninja. He's a secret weapon. Um, I I knew I wasn't going to stop writing. I knew I wasn't going to be, chasing it, um, like I did with Vandaveer. But I knew I was going to continue writing, and I was writing, and I was sitting on these songs, and Justin and I were just having conversations about what to do with them, and we just decided we would, you know, partner up, and I would, cede more creative control, and you know, really let him take the driver's seat when it comes to the production side of things. And he made very, at the time, to me, that seemed like very bold decisions. They seemed fresh and new, and we, spent 2.5 years bouncing back and forth between Brooklyn and Louisville, um, just letting the songs dictate, you know, the, we just let the songs tell us where they were supposed to go, and I let Justin tell me where the songs were supposed to go, and went through many, many different, they went through many different stages and different forms. I do remember sending you the demos. This is super helpful, I will say. I remember sending you the demos early on, and you sat on it for about a week or two, and you came back. You said, "Mark, I think you've made this record before." You said,
That's not fair. That's not what I said. You
No,
told
no, no,
me.
that's
You
not
told
fair.
me. You were like, I'm writing these songs right now, and they're completely different. Like
I
this is
did.
a
I
whole new
did.
world. And I listened to them, and
Yeah, I
what I
did.
told you was I love the songs, and I think they're great because I'm a Vandaveer fan. But I
Yeah.
didn't think that they sounded different than the
And you were
earlier
right.
work.
You were 100% right. But you singled one out. I remember there was one song, and you said, "This one feels different. Uh, this is the path. If different is what you're going for." And you said, I remember you saying, "You don't need to be different. You can, it was hugely helpful advice, and feedback, Joe. But I remember you singling out a particular song, and at the time, that batch of demos, the one tune that you had pointed out was the one that Justin had truly tinkered with and had started pushing in a different direction. And I thought, I think Joe's right, and I think Justin's right, and I think I need to let go because it was a really important stay. There were many stages in making that record, but I do look back to that exchange with you. It was hugely helpful. You had talked about how, was it Kenneth who produced your last record and the role he played in helping you shape your songs. And I remember thinking, I need that. If
Yeah.
if Joe needs that, I definitely need that. And yeah, so thank you for that. That was a long
Yeah.
overdue thanks.
And of course, the song that sounded so different, that was your a cappella cover of Pink Floyd's The Wall. That's
Weirdly enough, it was.
that's why it sounded so different. Um, what does it feel like to be putting down a record? I know you sat on this for a long time, for various obvious global reasons. It was a crazy 2 years. What does it feel like to be putting out a record again? How does the music business feel different than it did 3 or 4 years ago, last time you put out a record?
Well, it's a huge relief, and to finally have this, you know, exist outside of, my head or on my hard drive. So I'm just eternally grateful that I can even put this thing out and that there are people interested in helping me do that. Um, I also my appetite for the chase, is at an all-time low, and so I'm content. I'm really, really content with whatever happens with this record. And I am, much like, I did, sort of ceding some of that control and letting Justin take the reins from a production standpoint, really leaning on people who know a lot more about the industry than I do to sort of help me decide what I should do with this record. And there are compromises I'm not going to make. There are sacrifices I'm not going to make. I'm not going to leave my family for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. So I am tempering my expectations. I know there are thousands of great records coming out, every year. I am also putting out a record. It's not really up to me to say if speak of its quality. So I'm happy that it's coming out. I'm thrilled that there are people who are interested in helping me do that. I did this cheeky sort of pre-sale fan club thing to help sort of finance the actual release of the record, and I was absolutely blown away by the response and the support I got from that. So that gave me, a little extra fuel to say, okay, I can do this. I can put this thing out.
Well, it's a great record, and you're right. You can't put too much stock at this point in life into how it goes, because I think the number is, and someone mentioned this on the program recently, but it's something like 60,000 songs a day are uploaded to Spotify.
Wow. I didn't know it was that
I
many.
could be wrong.
No, man, that's
whatever the number is, when you hear the number,
Yeah.
you're like, it sounds like 60,000.
yeah.
It's
more than you'll be able to listen to
yes, or any human
in a
being.
lifetime.
So yeah, it's where we are. Ubiquity is the reality at this point.
Yeah. But again, that's a blessing. I mean, that is a byproduct of the times we live in, as uncertain and crazy as they seem. And, when we feel like, we're in political peril or, geopolitical peril, we're still living in incredibly fortunate, healthful times. It all could come crashing to an end in a day or two, but
It's not.
until then.
But here, I have every song in the world at my fingertips, and yet I still just listen to Ugly Kid Joe's "What I Hate About You" on repeat 6 hours a day. Does that make me an unhealthy person? I don't know.
Does it make any sense? No. Does it make you happy? Obviously.
Oh, man. Well, look, it's great to talk to you, brother. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Godspeed with the new release. I love the record. So it's a great one in my book. And yeah, man, good luck.
Joe, thank you so much. I love you, buddy. I wish we could chat like this once a week.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. The latest album by Mark Charles is entitled Calamity Strikes, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.